We continue now at the top of Daf Pezayin Amud Beis in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 87b. The Gemara here is discussing the fact that, let's say, a Bas Kohen marries Yisrael, and then the Yisrael dies, so she returns to her father's house, and she can have Truma once again. And the Gemara had two limudim, one that taught us that if she's pregnant from the Yisrael, she cannot have Truma, and the other that said that if she has children from the Yisrael, she cannot have Truma. And the Gemara is in the middle of explaining why we need both. And so the Gemara says, if it only said that we're talking about a pregnant woman, so then I would say that's because Srika, that's because originally she was empty, meaning to say that she was not bearing a child. V'hashda gufa malya, now her body is full, now she's pregnant, so maybe in that case, we say she's no longer in her youth. That's what the pasuk uses, that language, and therefore in that case she might not get Truma. Avol zera einla, but in a situation where the pasuk which teaches us that if she has children, meaning only when she has no children, but if she has children she doesn't get Truma. Tmeikara gufa srika v'hashda gufa srika, there, had the pasuk not said anything, so I would say, since in the beginning she was an empty body, and now she's an empty body, meaning to say she's already given birth, and there's no child in her womb, so Eimalo, so I might say not, meaning I might say in such a situation she could return to her father's house and have Truma, and therefore Tzricha, therefore I need both psukim to say that if she's either pregnant or if she has had a child, in both situations she cannot have Truma. And the Gemara continues at the Tudat Siman. This is a mnemonic to remember the following. Gemara Amar Le Lo Nasa Masya B'Misa Nasa V'Lo Nasa B'Vlad Yavam U'Truva Yibam U'Truma Yibam U'Truma Siman. Again, that's a mnemonic for the coming Gemara. And the Gemara says, Amar Le Rav Yehuda Mida Askarta L'Rava. Rav Yehuda from Askarta, he said to Rav as follows: Lo Nasa Mesim Kechayim L'Inyan Yibam. We should say that we do not treat Mesim the same as Chayim, meaning to say we don't treat, let's say they had a child that died, we should not treat it the same as a child that was alive. Now, even though by Yibam generally we do. We say that when it comes to Yibam, let's say the husband died and they had a child, it doesn't matter if that child is alive or not, we treat Mesim Kechayim. But now Rav Yehuda is arguing to Rava that we should not treat Mesim like Chayim as far as Yibam is concerned. Why? Mikal v'chomer, because we should make a kal v'chomer against it. What's the kal v'chomer? Uma b'mokom she'asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni lepos min hatruma. When it comes to a truma situation, there it does not make a difference if she had a child from the first or a child from the second. In those situations, in both situations, she had that child from a Yisrael, and therefore she's puzzled from truma. But lo asa mesim kachayim. But when it comes to truma, we do not treat the mesim like the chayim. Meaning, if she had a child that died, so in that case she does get to have truma. It's only if the child is still alive from the Yisrael that she doesn't have truma. So makom shelo asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni lepotra min hayibam. In a situation of yibam, there we do not treat the child from the first marriage the same as the child from the second marriage. In other words, like we said, let's say a woman is married, her husband dies, and let's say a woman is married and her husband dies and she had a child, so there's no yibam in that case. Then she marries a second husband. That husband dies with no child, so there we say there is yibam. The fact that she had a child from a previous marriage is irrelevant. So, meaning to say, we don't care about that. So, in such a situation where we don't treat the Vlad min Harishon like the Vlad min Hasheni, Einodin Shalom Nasa Mesim Kachayim, so too it should be true by Yibam that we should not treat the Mesim like the Chayim. Shouldn't we make that Kal V'chomer? And the Gemara says to that, no, we do not make that Kal V'chomer, because Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, that the ways of the Torah are pleasant. And Rashi over here explains, V'lo Nasa Mesim Kachayim, we shouldn't say that Mesim are treated like Chayim when it comes to Yibam, meaning to say, v'tachzor lezeka, she should go back to the bond, she should have to do Yibam, im yamas benol achar zman, if her son dies after a certain period of time, we should say such an argument. And to that the Gemara ultimately said, no, we don't say that, because the ways of the Torah are pleasant. So this woman over here, she had a child, she wasn't obligated to do Yibam, and now she went and she married someone else. Now her son dies, if you're going to say that she has to do chalitza, so the husband she's currently married to, that's not going to look good for him. He's not going to like that. Therefore, obviously, the case is, if she had any children at the time that the husband died, it doesn't matter if the child died later on. You're not going to say that if suddenly the child dies later on, she needs the chalitza. That's not going to be a good situation. That would not be a pleasant situation. And the Gemara continues, V'nasa mesim kechayim linyan truma mikal v'chomer. So why don't we say that mesim should be like chayim when it comes to truma from the following kal v'chomer? In other words, again, when it comes to truma, whether there's a child that's alive or whether there's a child that has died, we should still say that in those situations she is not allowed to have truma because she had a child with Yisrael. And we should make the following argument: if in a situation of yibam where we don't treat the child from the first marriage like the child from the second one, that doesn't exempt her from yibam. But also mesim kachayim. But again, when it comes to yibam, we treat the mesim just like the chayim. As long as she had a child, that is enough to pater, even whether the child's alive or not. So Mokam Shasa Vlad Min Harishon Kevlad Min Hasheni, in a situation like Truma, where we treat the Vlad from the first husband the same as the second husband, it doesn't make a difference if she had a child from Yisrael, whether it's the first or second marriage, she's going to be excluded from Truma. Lepos L'minat Truma, she's disqualified from Truma. So Eino Din Shenasa Mesim Kachayim, we should make a Kal V'chomer and say, also if the child has died, we should treat it the same way as if the child is alive, and it should disqualify her from Truma. So why don't we say that Kal V'chomer? And to that the Gemara says Talmud Lomar, it's because the pasuk says V'zera Ein Lo, she has no children, V'ha Ein Lo, and in this situation she has no children, meaning the child has died, and therefore she's not disqualified from Truma. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. V'naseh Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni le'inyan yibum. Why don't we treat any child, whether it's from a previous husband, previous marriage, or whether it's from this second husband that just died, we should treat it the same way as far as yibum is concerned, and say, therefore, she has a child, there is no obligation of yibum. Mikal v'chomer, we should make the following kal v'chomer. Uma b'makom shelo asa meisim kechayim linyan truma. If with regards to truma, we don't treat a child that has died the same as if the child was alive. Again, if the child died, then she's allowed to go back to her father's house and have truma. But also Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni. But when it comes to truma, whether it's a child from a first marriage or a second marriage, it's the same thing. That child can disqualify her from truma. So makom shasa meisim kechayim linyan yibum. So when it comes to yibum, where we do treat a child that has died the same as a child that is alive, in both cases we say she has a child and there's no yibum. So eino din shenasa Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni. So maybe we should say logically that it doesn't matter if she has a child from a first marriage or a second marriage. Any child she has should be enough to say that there's no yibum. And to that the Gemara says Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says Uven ein lo, he doesn't have a child. V'ha ein lo, meaning this particular one does not have a child. That's what we're focusing on. We're focusing only on the child of the husband who has just died. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. V'lo nasa Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni letruma. When it comes to truma, we should not treat a child from the first marriage the same as a child from a second marriage. In other words, we should not say the child from the first marriage disqualifies her from truma. Mikal v'chomer, make the following kal v'chomer. Ma b'makom sha'asa meisim kechayim lepochim min Yibam, if when it comes to Yibam, where we say it doesn't matter if the child has died or not, it's the same as if the child is alive. Lo asa Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni, and there by Yibam also we do not treat a child from a first marriage the same as the second marriage. So makom shelo asa mesim kechayim linyan truma. So therefore, when it comes to truma, where we do not treat if the child has died the same as if the child is alive, if the child has died, then we allow her to eat truma. Eino din shelo nasa Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni. So shouldn't it be true that we should not treat a child from the first marriage the same as the second one? And therefore, again, if the child came from the first marriage, that should not disqualify her from truma. Talmud Lomar, no, the pasuk says ein lo, she has no children. V'ha yeshlan. In this particular case, she does have children. Hadran aloch yesh mutaros. That is the end of parak yesh mutaros, the end of the 9th parak of Mesechet Yevamos. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And please take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the 10th parak of Mesechet Yevamos. And the Mishnah says, "Ho'isha sheholach ba'alo lemedinas hayam." Let's say a woman, her husband went far away. Uvo v'yomrula, and then they come and they say to her, "Meis balach, your husband has died." V'nisas, and so she gets married to somebody else. V'yachar kach bo bala, and then after this, her husband comes back. So the halach is teitzei mizeh u'mizeh. She has to divorce from both of them, the first husband and the second one. Utzricha get mizeh u'mizeh. She needs a get from both of them. Ve'ein lo ksuba, she doesn't get a ksuba. V'lo peiros, she gets no peiros. V'lo mizono, she doesn't get sustenance. V'lo below, she doesn't get the worn-out clothing. Lo alzeh v'lo alzeh, not on either husband. V'im notla mizeh u'mizeh. Now, if she does take from this one or from this one, tachzir, she has to return what she took. V'havlad mamzer mizeh u'mizeh. Also, any child that she has from either one is going to be considered a mamzer. V'lo zeh v'zeh mitami lo. Neither husband is allowed to be mitami, for it's not considered his wife. In terms of, let's say he was a kohen, he's allowed to be mitami to his wife. This does not count. V'lo zeh v'zeh zakoyim, and neither one of them merits lo b'mitziyasa. Let's say she finds something, he doesn't get that. V'lo b'maisei yodeh. Let's say she works and she makes money, he doesn't get that money. V'lo b'hafaras nadera. And also, neither of these are considered her husband, in the sense that neither of them are allowed to annul her vows. And Rashi over here says, Ho'isha bo v'amru la be'eid echad. The case over here is that there was one aid that said that her husband died. K'dedai kinon b'gemara miseifa. The Gemara is going to make that inference from the end of the Mishnah. Teitzei mizeh mizeh. She has to separate from both of them. Keshar eishas ish shazin. So we treat her like any other married woman who committed adultery. Tahach lav anusahi. This is not considered a case of an anusa, somebody who was forced into it. V'avagav dehimnu rabbanan le'eid echad b'isha. Now, even though no, the Rabbanan believe one witness, and one witness did come and testify here. Mishum iguna, because of iguna, we don't want the woman to be tied down to this husband who we don't know what his status is. Taimamai, but what's the reason why we rely on one aid? Mishum dehigufa daika diyoda bekushto mitzvah, because we assume that she also checked out very carefully to make sure that in truth the husband has died and she can remarry. V'hadalo daika kansila, but this woman over here did not look into it carefully, and therefore this is a fine against her. Again, this idea of teitze mizeh mizeh. Utzricha get mizeh mizeh, she needs to get from both of them, and tirtza linase la'acher, let's say she wants to marry someone else, she needs to get a get from both of them. But time of the boy get misheni mefarsh b'gemara. The Gemara is going to explain why does she need to get from the second person, because the second person shouldn't have been a real marriage, because she was actually married to the first husband. So the Gemara will explain why she needs to get from the second. Mizonos, it says she doesn't get mizonos in this case. Even, let's say she borrowed in order to eat, and now she wants to get paid back, she's not entitled to that. Below, she doesn't get the worn out clothing that she brought into the marriage. Even those clothing she brought in, she can't bring out those very same clothing. And any child she has from either one is a mamzer. If she has a child from the second one, the one she committed adultery with, that's certainly a full mamzer. Now, if she goes ahead and remarries the first husband and has a child, that child's going to be a mamzer midrabanan. And we will just note over here that when it says she doesn't get peiros, that essentially means she doesn't get any profits from her property that was used by these husbands. And the Mishnah continues, let's say she's a Bas Yisrael, so because of the fact that she married this second husband when she was really still married to the first, she is now disqualified from the kahuna. Ubas Levi min Meiser, if she's a daughter of a Levi, she's disqualified from Meiser. Ubas Kohen min Truma, if she's the daughter of a Kohen, she's disqualified from Truma. Ve'in Yorshin shel zeh, ve'Yorshin shel zeh, Yorshin es ksubasa. Neither the inheritors of the first husband nor the inheritors of the second husband, neither of them are able to inherit her ksuba. V'yemesu, and if they die, achiv shel zeh, v'achiv shel zeh, so the brother of this one, the brother of that one, either one who dies, choltzin v'lo miyavmin. They should do chalitza, but they should not do yibum. And Rashi over here says, nifsul min akuna. Again, we said that this relationship disqualifies the woman from kahuna. Mishum zona, she's considered a zona. And min meiser, if she's a bas levi, she's disqualified from meiser kanasa. That's actually a fine. V'chein truma derabanan. The same thing by trumas derabanan. Yarsh and ksubasa, they inherit her ksuba. It said, the Gemara parach ksuba maya. The Gemara is going to ask, what ksuba are you talking about over here? You already said that she doesn't get the ksuba. And then the Mishnah said that if either of them will die, then the brothers should do choltzin, they should do chalitza. Achiv shel rishon midoraisa cholet. So the brother, the first one, that was a real marriage. That one has to do chalitza on a doraisa level. V'rabbanon gazer deloli yavim. The Rabbanon say don't do yivim, you should do chalitza. V'achiv shel sheni. Now the brother of the second one, which wasn't a real marriage, cholet midrabbanon. That's just a requirement of chalitza on a derabbanon level. Misham gzeira shemayomru giresh zev and asad zev v'chulu. That's because of a gzeira that we'll mention later on. Kidim mefarish b'gemara got beget. That's going to be mentioned later on in the Gemara. And the Mishnah continues. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says ksubas al nechse ba'ala rishon. She does receive a ksuba, and it comes from the property of the first husband. Rabbi Lozer Omer. Rabbi Lozer says harishon is zakai b'mitziasa uv'maisei yadeh uv'afaras nedorea. That first husband, he does merit. Let's say she finds something, he gets that property. Also, let's say she produces something, she produces value, he gets that value, and also he's entitled to annul her vows. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Biyasa o chalitzasa me'achav shel rishon. If she has relations or chalitza with the brother of the first husband, poteres tzarasa, that actually would be considered an effective yibum or chalitza, and it would pater her co-wife. V'yein havlad mimenu mamzer, and furthermore, a child that she has with that first husband is not going to be a mamzer. V'yem nisis shelo b'rashus, and if she gets married without permission, and Rashi over here explains, Biyaso chalitzasa reisha polik. This is arguing on the reisha. The katani lo miyavmin, and the reisha said they're not allowed to do yibum. Here it says the yibum is effective. V'yein havlad mamzerim hachzira harishon, and the child is not a mamzer. Let's say that first husband takes her back. That child is not a mamzer. Again, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And the Mishnah continues, if she marries without permission to the second man, muteres lachzor lo, so then she's allowed to return to her first husband. And Rashi over here explains, nisas shelo b'rishos bezdin. Let's say she gets married without permission from bezdin, meaning shabo shnei edim. Let's say two edim come, v'yomru meis balech, and they say that your husband died. V'nisis meyatzma, and she gets married on her own. Sharei lo haisa tzricha leheter bezdin. In this case, she doesn't need a heter from bezdin because she's relying on two witnesses. So muteres lachzor lo. So in that case, she is allowed to return to her first husband, dianusi, because that's already considered a situation of an anusa, meaning to say it's considered a situation beyond her control because she was relying on two witnesses. And the Mishnah continues with another difference between Nisas al pi bezdin and Nisas shelo b'rishus. Nisas al pi bezdin, if she marries al pi bezdin, so teitze, so then she divorces, like we said, both husbands. Upetura min carbon, and she's pater from any carbon. She doesn't have to bring a carbon for the adultery. But lo Nisas al pi bezdin, let's say she didn't marry through the authorization of the court, so then teitze, she has to leave the second husband, as we said. V'chayeves b'carbon, but she's chayev in a carbon. Yafe koach bezdin, that's why the koach of bezdin is strong. Shepotrim in a carbon, because it's able to pater from bringing a carbon, because it's considered like she did it with the authority of bezdin, so she doesn't have to bring a carbon for that avera. And the Mishnah concludes, Horua bezin linasi, if the bezin instructs her that she can marry another man, v'holcha v'kilkala, but then she goes ahead, instead of marrying the other man, she just has nus with him, so chayav is b'karban, in that case she does have to bring the carbon, shalohi tirua ela linasi, because really they only permitted her to remarry. And Rashi over here says, uptura min carbon, if she did it with the authorization of bezin, she's pater from a carbon. Yachid sha'asa b'oras bezin pater, it's a general rule, if a yachid does something by the instruction of bezin, they're pater from a carbon. But shalo al pi bezin, if she doesn't do it through a bezin, ela be'edim, she just does it with witnesses, chayev is carbon, she is chayev a carbon. The shogegasi, because now the Mishnah is saying that it's considered shogeg, it's considered a mistake. Ve'ein ze ones, this is not considered at the level of ones, lihi pater min carbon, that she's pater from carbon. Di boil because she should have waited, she should have made sure. And what that means to say is, even though she had two witnesses, she should have waited for the authorization of the Bezdin. And the Gemara says, Midakatani Seifa, from the fact that at the end of the Mishnah it says, Nisis Shalo B'Rishus, the case over there was she marries without permission from Bezdin, Muteres Lachzor Lo, and then she's allowed to go back to her first husband, Shalo B'Rishus Bezdin Ela Beidim. It sounds like the Seifa of the Mishnah is talking about where she doesn't have the permission of Bezdin, rather she's relying on two witnesses like Rashi said. Mechlal, that implies the Reisha B'Rishus Bezdin. At the beginning of the Mishnah, we're talking about where she has permission of Bezdin, Uvi Eid Echad, and we're relying on one aid. Almo Eid Echad Namon. You see from our Mishnah that one aid is going to be believed. Utananami, we learned in a Mishnah as well. Hochzaku lios masiin aid mi pi aid, v'isha mi pi isha, v'isha mi pi eved, mi pi shifcha. That we rely, when we're allowing this woman to remarry, we're relying, let's say, one aid heard from another aid, or let's say a woman heard from another woman, or a woman heard from an eved, or a woman heard from a shifcha. In all of these cases, we're going to rely on that testimony in terms of determining the status of the husband. And you see from this Mishnah as well that one aid is going to be believed. Utananami, we also learned in a Mishnah in Krisus. Let's say one aid says you ate chaylev, and he says I didn't eat chaylev. So pater, so in that case he's pater. We believe him over the witness. Time or damer lo achalti, but the only reason is because he says I didn't eat. Ha'ishtik, but if he's quiet, mehemen, then apparently again the eid echad is believed. Alma eid echad mehemen mido rais. So you see that in general, an eid echad is believed on a do raisa level. Rashi over here says ha'ishtik mehemen. If the guy would be quiet, we would believe it, and we would say v'lo arminan chulin lazar kamaisi. We would tell the person to bring a carbon, and we wouldn't say it's like bringing chulin lazar. In other words, we're relying on one witness. And so the Gemara says Minolan. So from where do we know that on a Doraisa level you can rely on one witness? The Tanyas we learned in a Braisa. Ohoda elav chatasu. It says that a person became aware of his sin, then he brings a carbon. Velo shiodu acherim. It has to be that he becomes aware of it, he has a yediyah, not that other people let him know. Yachol ava pisheno machisho yepater. Now I might think, even if the guy doesn't contradict, let's say somebody tells him he did a sin, and he doesn't contradict, even then he should be pater. Talmud lomar ohoda elav mikol makom. The pasuk says if it's made known to him in any way that it's made known to him. In other words, if it's made known to him, meaning someone tells him, others tell him that he did this sin, and he doesn't contradict, so then in that case he will be obligated to bring a carbon. And so the Gemara wants to clarify, what is this yodiu acherim? Who's the one that's letting him know? Hey Chidami, what exactly is the case over here? If you're going to say the case is that the Bryce is talking about two people come and say that he did an Avera, and he's not contradicting them, he's not arguing with them. So in such a case, if that's the case, what do we even need a pasuk for? You think the pasuk Talmud Lomar Ohoda Elav, the pasuk is teaching us that if two witnesses come and he doesn't contradict them, so the pasuk says chayiv. What do we need a pasuk for? So that would be obvious that he'd be chayiv in such a case. Elalav, rather is it not? What does the brayso mean? Chad, there's one witness over here telling him that he did the avera. V'chi lo kamachish le, and if the person himself doesn't contradict the one witness, mehemen, apparently that one aid is believed. Shma mino eid echad nemon. You see from here that 1/8 is believed. And again, Rashi over here says, V'chi lo machesh le mehemen. If he doesn't argue with the one witness, apparently the witness is believed. Al moed echad mehemen. You see 1/8 is believed. Be'isur v'heter, when it comes to isur and heter. The kamaisi chatas apumim, we're willing to bring even a carbon chatas based on the testimony of the one witness, u'misachla, and you can eat the carbon chatas. The lo mehemen hechi misachla. If the aid wasn't believed, how could it be that you could eat from such a carbon? Dil mechulin ba'azarin ninu. Maybe that's really chulin that was brought to the azara, which you wouldn't be able to eat from. But the Gemara continues, umimai demishum demehemen. But how do you know that the brisa means that the reason why is because we're trusting that one aid? Dilma mishum de kashasik. Maybe the real reason is because the person himself is being quiet. Ushtika koda damya. And maybe the real idea is that shtika is considered like an admission. So it's like the person himself admitted that he did the aver. It has nothing to do with trusting the one witness. And the Gemara says, Teda, you should know the katani seifa, because it says in the seifa as follows. It says at the end as follows. Amru shnayim achalta chaylev. Let's say two people say to him that you ate chaylev. Vu omer lo achalti, and he says I didn't eat the chaylev. So pater. So in that case it says he's pater. In that case, even though two people said he ate chaylev, but since he denied it, he's pater. And Rabbi Meir mechayev. Rabbi Meir says no. In that case, the fact that he denies it doesn't matter. He's chayev because two witnesses said he ate chaylev. And Omer Rabbi Meir said kal v'chomer. I can make a kal v'chomer to prove I'm right. If two witnesses are able to bring a person to the death penalty, which is so strict, so lo yiviyuli they carbon akal. You think that two witnesses can't bring him to have to bring a carbon? So who cares that he denied it? Of course, we're going to believe the two witnesses. Amru lo. So now the chacham said back to Rabbi Meir, no, ma'am yirzalomer mezid hayisi, because the guy could have said back. The reason why we believe him when he says lo achalti, the reason why we don't rely on the two witnesses, we don't make him bring a carbon, is because he could respond, I did it on purpose. Now, if he did it on purpose, he's actually not going to bring a carbon. You only bring a carbon if you're b'shogeg. Rashi over here says, umam yirzalomer mezid hayisi hareza nemon lifter atzmi carbon. If he said I did it b'mezid, he would be believed to pat himself from a carbon. The Edom can't contradict them, say, no, you did it by mistake. How could they contradict him? And that's why in this case, if he says, I did indeed, he's believed. Now, from the fact that they're arguing about this case of two witnesses who say he had chaylev, that sounds like in the reisha we're talking about one witness was the one that was saying that he ate. The dayik minoha ishtik chayev, and we're making an inference over there that if he was quiet, then he'd be chayev. Divrei hakoli. That sounds like everybody would agree. And so therefore, the Gemara now says reisha. So in the reisha, what is the logic of that case? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Peiches Amud Aleph.